Beautiful day here in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm here part of a Sub-Saharan Africa IMB Team Leadership Workshop. We've been having a great time here at the Team Leaders Summit. We've been talking about what it means to be a leader. We've been having great times of devotion, breaking into God's Word, talking about how important it is for leaders to abide in Christ. We've also been doing some talking about personality profiles. You can't really see this, but looking at our Grip Berkman, what are our spiritual gifts, what are the things that stress us, what are the things that give us life, and how can we incorporate that as we work with teams and as we develop leaders. Today in our session, we're going to be talking more about leadership, looking at some definitions, looking at mistakes that leaders make. We're going to also be talking a little bit about different styles of leadership. How do you know how to lead your team in different circumstances? Hopefully you'll find this interesting. I know that it's very important. I've seen what happens when teams are led well and what has happened when teams were not led well. So really hope you'll be paying attention, thinking about the people that God has placed in your life and given you the privilege of leading. Welcome in our discussion of leadership development. Today we're going to be talking about principles of leadership development. I hope you had a good study of the character of Barnabas to see him as an example of a godly leader, a godly man. Just want to say we're going to look at some things today. We're going to look at some definitions of leadership and some characteristics of godly leaders, some mistakes that leaders make, and some leadership styles that you might want to consider using. But overall, when it comes to the topic of leadership, I just want to challenge you. Think about the people that God has placed in your life who have been leaders to you. You can learn about leaders by reading books or listening to this video, but I really think the best examples of leadership are the people in your life. They can be good examples. You see things that someone does and you say, I want to know how they do that. I'm going to ask them about that, or I'm going to follow their pattern. Or you can look at situations that have been very difficult for you and you can say, when I'm in an opportunity to be in a leadership position, I want to make sure I don't do that. I don't treat people that way. So there are things that we can learn from books, but I really want you just mostly to learn to be aware of how other people's leadership styles affect you and affect others that you see, whether that's for the good or for the bad, and how you can adapt to that. But we will be looking at a little bit of a formal understanding of leadership today, starting, of course, by looking at some definitions. Robert Clinton is one of the best writers on Christian leadership, so any opportunity you have to read one of his books, I would highly recommend it. He says that leadership is a dynamic process in which a man or woman with God-given capacity influences a specific group of God's people towards his purposes for the group. I think you can see in this definition that leadership is not an assignment, it's not a job title. It is basically influence. It's using your influence to help people move forward in what God has called them to do, whether that's within the context of a church or a ministry team or a mission plan, but using the gifts that God has given you to influence people to move forward, to do what He has asked you to do. The International Mission Board, in some of their publications, has defined leadership as the capacity to influence others to pursue a common cause. Christian leadership is influencing through godly character, example, and relationships. So you see, it's a very similar definition. Influence is really the key term here, and doing that through your character, your example, and your relationships, not through your authority structure. Final definition comes from Kenneth Gangle in his book, Feeding and Leading. He says, Christian leadership is the exercise of one's spiritual gifts under the call of God to serve a certain group of people in achieving the goal God has given them toward the end of glorifying Christ. Reflect back on what you read and thought as you were studying about Barnabas in that Bible study that we had assigned, and I think you'll see that's exactly what he did. No one said, hey Barnabas, you're the king of missions here in Antioch. No one said, you're going to develop a mission agency and we're going to call you the strategy leader for the work that Paul will initiate. He just used his influence, his relationships, his example, his character to move the group forward to complete what God had called them to do. So that's why I wanted us to look at him. I think he's an excellent example of what leadership is. I want us to continue talking about a biblical basis for understanding the characteristics of godly leaders. And I'm going to use an outline from an article by a man named Brent Reinhardt. He was looking in the book of Proverbs chapter 16, and he noticed 9 characteristics of godly leaders are all found in this passage. And I thought that was just an excellent discovery. And so we're just going to kind of read through some of these verses and look at characteristics of a godly leader, beginning in Proverbs 16:1. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. So the first characteristic of a godly leader is they seek God's direction. They know that it is what God says that is what they need to be doing. His plans are the ones that need to be followed. Second characteristic he finds in verse 5, everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Assuredly, he will not go unpunished. That's kind of a negative example. The positive spin is that a godly leader will be modest, not arrogant. Related to that in verse 7, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. A godly leader will be a peacemaker. Being a peacemaker is a very important part of leading, not feeding into factions, not helping your team become divided, but helping them work together towards that common goal that God has given you. If that's an area you want to do more study in, Ken Sande has written a great book called The Peacemaker. If you want more information on that, let me know. But it's an excellent resource tool for developing a team that's healthy, a church that's healthy, a group that's healthy in terms of moving forward, making peace in a godly way. Moving on into verse 8, we read, better is a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. A godly leader is going to be fair and just. They're not going to cut corners to make money or to seem impressive or to inflate the numbers of their ministry results. They're going to be fair and just and be happy with what God is providing, not exaggerating and not playing favorites. The next characteristic is found in verse 13. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and he who speaks right is loved. A godly leader is someone who's going to listen to counselors. They're not going to, I think this is related to not being arrogant, but they're willing to learn from others, always wanting to learn. A friend of mine who served with us in India noticed that all of the vehicles, the driver training vehicles, had a L on the back of them to indicate that the driver was a learner. He thought that every leader should have an L on their back, not that said that they were a leader, but said that they were a learner, a reminder that we're still learning and we still need to listen to counselors. Verse 16 says, how much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen above silver. A good leader is a good learner. Just again, that same idea that they want wisdom. They get that from listening to counselors. They get that from listening to the Lord. They get that from continually studying, continually growing. And another repeat that we've already seen, 18 and 19, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be humble in spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. So just like we want to be modest and not arrogant, a good leader needs to be humble, knowing that anything that occurs that is good is not because of them, but it is because of the Lord. Verses 22 and 23, understanding is a fountain of life to one who has it, but the discipline of fools is folly. The heart of the wise instructs his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. A godly leader is going to be sensible and kind, not cutting, not insulting, not demeaning of the people that he's working with, but using his words to lift up the entire team to move forward to accomplish the goal. And then finally in verse 32, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who captures a city. A godly leader is going to be slow to anger. Take some time this week to read through Proverbs chapter 16 on your own and consider these verses and the other passages there. I think it's just a great description of what it is that God wants when he calls someone to be a leader. Not someone who can force people or coerce people or belittle or demean people, but somebody who can seek God's direction, act modestly, make peace, treat people fairly, listen to others, continue to learn with a humble spirit, demonstrate sensibility and kindness, and be slow to anger. Hopefully that's helpful in considering what it means to be a godly leader. Now I want to look at the flip side of that, the opposite side of that. What are some of the mistakes that leaders make? I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying not to be insulted by this happening. I don't think it was an insult, actually. I think it was just that opportunity to continue learning. But one of my supervisors one time gave me a book by Hans Finzel, said the top 10 mistakes a leader makes, and said, you should really read this book. And then he followed that up by saying, I'm not saying that you're going to make all of these mistakes, but I will confess that I have. And so he thought the book was very helpful. He gave it to me. I thought it was very helpful. And so now I want to share these 10 principles with you. 10 mistakes leaders make by Hans Finzel. By the way, he also defines leadership as influence. Great leaders challenge people to attempt things they would never try on their own and to attempt things we never thought we had in us. So he agrees with that idea that leadership is a question of influence. And so here are things that we can do that will limit our influence or will keep us from being effective. A top-down attitude. This is the idea that I'm the boss and I'm just going to tell you what to do and you're going to do whatever I say. He believes that the number one leadership sin is that of top-down autocratic arrogance, just telling people what they're supposed to do and not taking time to listen to them, not allowing them to develop their own character and their own ability to be a part of what the team is doing. Next comes putting paperwork before people work. We have subtly made task orientation more desirable in our leadership selection process, but without a healthy emphasis on people, we're actually accomplishing nothing. That's what he says, and I think he's absolutely correct. We need to remember that our goal is not to complete every form, to dot every I and cross every T. It is to help people grow in their relationship with Jesus. And so we want to make sure that we are making people count more than we are making papers get filed and processed. Absence of affirmation is the third mistake that he says leaders often make. We want to be motivated to look for the good in the people around us and to encourage them. What has been called by Ken Blanchard management by walking around, just finding where people are doing the right thing and saying, "Attaboy, well done, good job." Finzel says that good supervisors are people who give someone a shot in the arm without letting them feel the needle, but finding ways to push people forward that encourages them and recognizes what God is doing in them. Next is a mistake is not leaving room for mavericks, not letting people think outside of the box or work outside of the box. It's important that we're flexible, that we take some risks within our organization so that we can allow somebody to move forward, maybe not having too many layers of management or too many permissions needed to try out a new idea, to always have what we used to call a skunk works, an opportunity where people could be trying new things that we've never tried it that way before, but hey, maybe we'd see results we've never seen before if we did try to think outside of the box and try to do something. So not shutting down every idea with a comment like, "I wish it were that easy," or "That's impossible, we tried that before and it didn't work," but giving people enough room to experiment and explore. Dictatorship in decision-making is mistake number 5. Acting like I know all the answers and stifling the values of the individuals, not allowing people to think for themselves. He says, when the best leader's work is done, the people will say, "We did it ourselves." The greatest ideas are going to bubble up from the workers, is another way that he expresses that. And so allow people to be involved in the decision-making process. Avoid dirty delegation. That's a huge mistake. This is over-managing. It's one of the greatest sins of leadership, he says. Dirty delegation is when you give somebody a job and then take it back. "Here, I want you to do this. Oh, wait, I wanted to do it this way. I'm giving you this responsibility. No, you're not doing it the way I would have done it if I had kept it." And so you're not really empowering someone to do what you have given to them. He outlines 4 stages of delegation. You give someone an assignment. You give them the authority to carry out the assignment. You give them accountability to make sure that they're doing the assignment. And then you give them affirmation for what they have done. But never ask someone to do a task and then take it back away from them. Communication chaos is the 7th mistake that is very common. We often assume people know things and we don't tell them, and then we wonder why they acted as if they didn't know when it was on us. We never told them what they needed to know. We need to communicate the big picture with passion. We need to encourage leaders to spell out their purposes, their goals, and their core values, and we need to preach them from the housetops. We need to keep going over the basics so that everybody knows what's going on, what we're doing as a team, why what we're doing matters, why each aspect of our team's work is important to the overall goal. The 8th mistake is missing the clues of corporate culture. Corporate culture is the way insiders behave based on the values and group tradition that the group holds. He says that there are 6 biblical suggestions to deal with this conflict when it arises. First, as a leader, listen to win. Second, an effective leader will love diversity. Third, continually look for unity. Fourth, learn to like those who are different. Fifth, learn to separate methodology from theology. And then finally, long for God's glory. Develop a culture like that and your team will succeed and you will be an effective leader. The 9th mistake that many leaders make is success without successors. He says, pride tightens the grip on leadership. Humility relaxes and lets it go. What he means is, if you think I'm the only one that can ever do this, I have to always be in control. If I'm not in control, everything's going to fall apart. You strangle any leaders growing on your team. When you give leadership away, you multiply your leadership. And so you should always be mentoring someone, pouring skills into them, modeling what you want them to do, and allowing them enough room to grow. Keep in mind that there will be a day down the road when, with humility, we will have to pass the torch to our successor, and the ultimate measure of our leadership success is going to be whether or not they're able to succeed in our absence. Finally, a failure to focus on the future is his 10th leadership mistake. Leadership must be devoting itself to the issue of goals and strategies. Managers ask how, leaders ask where and why. We need a balance of visionary leadership and effective management. So we need to always be learning, always seeing what's on the horizon, what changes are coming ahead, and how are we going to adapt to those. And if we can avoid these 10 mistakes, we're going to be a much more effective leader, and we're going to see much greater results in the work to which God has called us and our team. Final aspect I want us to look at a little bit today is leadership styles and when to use them. And the reason I put and when to use them here is there's more to leadership style than saying, I am this kind of leader. You should be able to use all 6 of these leadership styles. You just need to know when is it the appropriate style? When is it the thing that you should be doing? First is the pace-setting leader. The pace-setting leader expects and models excellence and self-direction. If it were summed up in one phrase, it would be do as I do now. It's running ahead and hoping that your team is going to follow after you, expecting your team to follow after you. This is effective when you are working with a team of qualified people who've been working together for a while and they don't need micromanagement. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be the authoritative leader who's going to mobilize the team toward a common vision and focus on end goals and telling people, come with me, this is the way we're going to go. So a pace-setting leader says, you guys all know what you're doing, you've been around for a long time, follow me, let's go. The authoritative leader says, you guys don't really know what to do. Let me tell you exactly what to do. Both of these are important ways to lead, depending on if you're working with novices or experts. So consider where the people you're working with are on that spectrum. An affiliative leader is one who creates emotional bonds, that talks about the idea that people come first. Again, this is like getting over that paperwork is more important than people work. And so it's just providing the emotional support and encouragement that people need in times of stress, when teammates need to heal because of a trauma, whether it's personal or professional. They're suffering and they need to be encouraged to keep moving forward. The coaching leader is the one who is developing people for the future. The phrase here would be, try this, we're going to do this in another way, we're going to try something new, and we all want to be successful together, so hey, why don't you choke up on the bat a little bit or step away from the box a little bit, just giving them some specific encouragement to try things in a new way, coming alongside of them rather than pushing them from behind or leading them from the front. The coercive leader is probably the least effective, but there are times when someone needs it, when they are acting inappropriately, when a corrective action is necessary. It might help control a problem teammate, and it comes down to, you just need to do what I tell you. As I say, this should probably be the least used tool in your leadership tool belt, but there are times when it is appropriate. And then finally, the democratic leader is one who builds consensus through participation. The question here is, what do you think? And allowing everybody to give their input and coming together to come up with a plan that represents the needs of the entire team. So I think you will recognize that what we've talked about is just basically the same conversation from different perspectives. We have looked at Barnabas as a biblical model, Proverbs as a biblical model. We've talked about ways that leaders can fail and ways that leaders can succeed depending on what kind of style they want to use. And basically, we've just gone over the same ideas from a couple of different angles. Leadership comes down to being flexible, working for everyone's benefit, taking time to listen, taking time to learn, and moving forward together in a way that honors God and accomplishes the goal that He has set out for you. In our next session, we're going to look at leadership from a completely different aspect. We're going to talk about how do we develop leaders in a movement on the foreign field so that they can continue the work in the absence of the outside missionary. There's an article that I want you to read, to reflect on, and then to respond to in a forum. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Hope everything's going well. God bless. Fairly confident. Over your lifetime, you've had a number of leaders. You may not have, at the time, thought to use the word leader. You might have been parent or teacher or coach was the word that you used. But there have been people who've influenced you, who've mentored you, who've challenged you, who've inspired you. Take some time to think through the things we've talked about in today's lesson and consider how they illustrated those characteristics of a godly leader. Perhaps you've had leaders that have been irritating or troublesome for you. Consider maybe they were making one of the mistakes we've discussed, or they were using the wrong style, and there's a style that would have worked better for you. But just take some time to process in your own life how you've experienced leadership and what you can learn to make sure that you become a better, stronger leader for those who God places in your care.